From the Radio Cafe and the Quivira Coalition, you're listening to Down to Earth, the Planet to Plate podcast. I'm your host, Mary Charlotte Domandi. Today we're going to be talking to a guy who's helping get money from the federal government to regenerative farmers and ranchers. That's right after these brief announcements. First off today, the Quivira Coalition would like to thank Taos Ski Valley Foundation, an affiliate of the Moore Charitable Foundation, for their support of the Regenerate Conference. The Taos Ski Valley Foundation champions land, water, and the people protecting natural resources for future generations. Thank you so much for your sponsorship. This program is sponsored by the Agrarian Trust. Agrarian Trust is charting a new path forward for the land trust movement. They're advancing an innovative and robust model of land ownership in which agrarianism, social and environmental justice, community well-being, and the earth itself are all seen as fundamentally intertwined. They're doing this by helping regenerative farmers and ranchers to secure long-term, affordable leases. That helps to strengthen local food systems and to transform community relationships to the land across the country. Visit agrariantrust.org to learn more. This program is sponsored by the Greenhorns. Listeners to Down to Earth might enjoy the newly released 6th edition of the New Farmer's Almanac, a literary miscellany written by and for working agrarians. This year's volume is titled Adjustments and Accommodations, and it's full of essays, poetry, and images that explore how people are facing challenges and uncertainties on the land. Learn more and order your copy at greenhorns.org. I'm very happy now to welcome Dave Carter. He's Director of Regional Technical Assistance Coordination for the Flower Hill Institute, an Indigenous-led nonprofit organization that's coordinating the technical assistance network established by the USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service, all of which is a big mouthful of ideas that we're going to be talking about today. Welcome, Dave Carter, to Down to Earth.
It's great. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you.
So there's some good news that our listeners may not know much about, and that is that the Biden administration has made a big commitment to resiliency in agriculture. And we're going to be talking today about meat and poultry processing in particular. Before we get to the good news for smaller and mid-sized processors and producers, give us a sense of what the meat production and processing system looks like right now. I mean, we often hear the system is broken. What's broken?
Well, we've been told for years and years that the most resilient and efficient meat processing system would be to allow this consolidation into a few very large processing facilities owned by a very few companies. In fact, we're at the point right now where 4 companies control more than 80% of the meat processing, and the same thing for poultry. Well, that was supposed to be really, really efficient and, et cetera and so on. And I'm a fan of The Wizard of Oz, so I always say that COVID came along like Toto and ripped back the curtain to expose how inefficient and unresilient that system was. In the course of a couple of weeks, we had supermarket shelves empty. We had these big meat processing factories with COVID just ripping through them. We had ranchers and farmers who were having to euthanize their hogs and poultry because there was just no market. So when President Biden came in, he recognized early on that this was a real Achilles heel, and was actually almost the first thing that he did last year in 2022 in January was the White House announced a $1 billion commitment to creating what they call a more resilient, diverse, and equitable meat and poultry processing system.
Just to go back a step, help people understand how it can be that at the same time you've got empty shelves and processors are euthanizing their animals because there's no market. That does not make common sense.
And that's because that processor is the bottleneck. So you've got, for example, up the road from me here in Greeley, Colorado, you've got JBS with a facility that processes about 4,000 to 5,000 head a day. And all of a sudden they shut down. And so the ranchers had no way to get their animals to the processors, and the supermarkets all of a sudden didn't have anybody supplying them with meat. And so there was this real ugly dichotomy. Yeah.
There's another way that the system is broken, and that is what's happening to the producers. They take the most risk, they get the least return, and they really don't have control over a lot of the aspects of their business.
You're absolutely correct. And they are the last ones in line. So they've been, unfortunately, been price takers, been really forced to accept what was offered to them. And that's where, if you think about what's happening among, and I hate to call them consumers, they're our customers, but what's been happening among the public is there's more and more recognition that we can vote with our fork, that the choices that we make in purchasing determine how well and how long we live, but it also helps determine how the environment looks. It determines how animals are treated. And so the consumers have that desire. A growing number of shoppers have that desire. And there are ranchers and farmers out there that are raising the animals that meet their expectation. But again, it's been that central, that connector, that bottleneck that has kept those two from being able to connect in any reasonable in large-scale way.
Before we get to, I want to talk about this money that is available from the Biden administration because it's an important and very game-changing thing. But let's sort of flash forward for a minute. What kind of systemic changes would you, and you've spent a long career in agriculture, in meat producing and production and processing, what kind of systemic changes would you like to see in the long run? I mean, are we talking about building a predominantly local and regional food system for meat and poultry?
Yes, and I think that's part of a larger local and regional food system overall. The systemic change that I want to see is to make it easier for ranchers and farmers to connect with those customers that value the way that they produce their products. We will never, I've long resisted the idea that if you're a rancher or a farmer, the only way you're going to succeed is to produce the lowest cost product, because there are so many hidden costs within cheap products. And so, what we want to do is be able to communicate with the public about the value and the values that these ranchers are producing. Animals that are humanely raised, animals that are produced without growth hormones, animals that, are not shipped thousands of miles or 500 miles to be processed, and to make it easier then for people to know that they're getting the product from those producers.
So when you talk about hidden costs, those are the things you're talking about, like the carbon footprint, the lower quality meat because it's produced with all these hormones and inputs, things like that?
Exactly. And, one of the ironic things right now is that I look and see livestock as being one of the potential solutions for climate change. Livestock done right. And, we've been told for a long time that livestock are destroying the environment. The carbon, the methane and all of that. But if you look at the ranchers that are doing it properly and doing regenerative, holistic management, what they're doing with those animals, those grazing animals, of course, I come from a bison background, but it's true with lambs and cattle and other ruminants, is that the grassland ecosystem in North America is our equivalent of a rainforest. And the grasslands historically were about 40% of our land mass. And those grasses are incredibly efficient at capturing carbon and putting it down into the soil. They may only have, stems that are 6 inches or a foot above ground, but they have roots that go 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 feet down into the ground. And so they take that carbon and put it into the soil. But they have to have a gardener to help them grow. And that gardener is the grazing animals out there. So if we do it right, it's very important. I just read something this morning, I think it was in the New York Times, that in Canada, the forests in Canada have been net carbon emitters since 2001 because of the fires, because those forests do a great job of capturing carbon, but they store it above ground and the fires come through and it all goes back out. So I didn't mean to segue away from that, but we have a really powerful story to tell of what ranchers and farmers are doing here in the U.S., responsibly raising animals, creating delicious meat that is healthy for you and healthy for the environment. And we've got to be able to get that into the marketplace and get it to the folks who appreciate that value.
And the amazing thing is that right now, the government seems to actually understand that. There's money from the Biden administration, a lot of money, and there's a lot of people who need it. But getting it from point A to B, I think our theme is bottlenecks today. Getting that money from the government to the folks who need it is actually quite challenging. And this is one of the things that you are really working on. It requires both technical assistance and wisdom in how to channel it for the best long-term outcomes. How are you thinking about this? People always complain, it's like, oh, you're throwing money at the problem. And that has happened. I mean, we have seen examples of this many times. How do you channel money so that it really goes toward building effective long-term change?
So one of the brilliant things that U.S. Department of Agriculture and Secretary Vilsack did when there was this commitment of resources to create a more diverse meat processing system is they recognized that the people who needed to be accessing those resources and the people who were part of the solution in restructuring the meat processing industry were the folks who had the least experience in accessing those federal resources or, how to compete against, or at least go around, maybe not compete with, but go around the big four. And so they took a portion of that, of the commitment and said, we're going to pull together a network of organizations that can provide technical assistance to folks all the way through the process of, where do you find the grants, how do you apply for them, but then how do you develop your business? And, as one person that was in USDA said to me when we were putting this together, she said, I just want to make sure this isn't another situation where USDA shovels money out the door and 5 years later, everybody's wondering where the heck it went. We got to make sure that this money's going out in the right way. So what they did was they pulled together a really robust group of organizations. You've got the Intertribal Agriculture Council that works directly with the tribes. We've got the Niche Meat Processing Assistance Network out of the Oregon State University that's kind of an extension-based program. American Association of Meat Processors, the largest meat processing organization, but it doesn't represent the large meat processors. American Meat Science Association, the Ag Utilization Research Institute, Tuskegee University, that's helping us to reach out to historically underserved producers. And then the group that I'm with, the Flower Hill Institute, was brought on to coordinate this network. And so we're not only providing some direct technical assistance, but we're trying to make sure that we're steering people to the appropriate expertise, people that have the experience and the expertise that can help them with whatever phase of their project they're in.
This is a really interesting thing because there's all these folks who need help in, writing and submitting grant applications, and that, as anyone who's filled one of those things out, is an exercise in hitting your head against the cold brick wall of bureaucracy. How do you help people with that? And when you do so, are you helping them to build a skill set that they then have, or how are you thinking about that?
Oh, the rewarding and the really fun part of this job is people are coming at this with so many different, size, scales, species, what they're trying to do. We're working with some that are trying to build some regional, national brands. we're working with some who just want to feed their local community. And so part of what we're trying to do is first of all, what do you produce? What's the species? What are the number of animals you produce? What are your finishing protocols? What are your cultural practices that you have? The seasonality? What a potential for additional producers to get involved? And then the second thing is, where do you want to go with your product? Are you wanting to just go into your local community? Maybe you want to do some direct sales, a local retail store, farmers markets. Maybe you want to build a brand that'll go into maybe a regional grocery chain or start supplying some restaurants. Or maybe you want to do institutional. Maybe you want to get into the school lunch program. And so figuring out what people produce and where they want to go with it then helps us work with them to figure out, okay, here's how you get that from point A to point B. You may only want to develop a glorified community kitchen, commercial kitchen with a rail and some packaging equipment so people can process their animals. Or you may need a brick and mortar processing plant that does case-ready products, or something in between. There's mobile, there's modular, there's all different kinds of things. And this is a really key point, is how can we sell the whole animal? Because this is the real challenge that smaller processors face, is that JBS and Smithfield and the others, they get something for every piece that comes off that animal. They may not get a lot for some of it, but they get something. And so there's about $80 of value of what they get for the hides and the offal and everything.
$80?
Yep, per animal. And when you look, the consolidation in some of the byproducts, like the rendering business, has been even more severe than it has been in the packing business. So JBS is getting a little bit of money selling that. These smaller processors are paying to have it hauled to a landfill. The Hide and Leather Council of America estimates that 5 million beef hides a year end up in landfills, primarily from these smaller processors because they just don't have a market for it. And so when you're in a business where your margins, you operate on razor thin margins, that difference of getting $80 per animal for that or paying $20 to have it hauled away determines whether or not you stay in business. And again, there are, a growing part of the public that wants these quality. They want real leather. They're tired of pleather, the plastic leather that doesn't, hold up and cracks and wears, but they want leather that's regeneratively produced, or is bison or tribally produced, or has these attributes. That's what these smaller processors can produce, are those hides that have that. At the same time, I've been involved in the pet food business for about 2 decades as well, so I know that one pretty well, and I watch the humanization of pets is off the chart. Fido doesn't sit out in front of the house and garden anymore. He's in bed with mom and dad. And so people are wanting to feed their companion animals the same quality of diet they're feeding the rest of their family. Well, guess who's producing those organic, regenerative, hormone-free ingredients are these smaller processors. So we've just got to be able to, again, to create the infrastructure that allows these smaller processors to get all of the products, the steaks, the roasts, the burger, the hearts, the lungs, the hides, to those folks that value the quality of those products.
You're listening to Down to Earth. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
We're in a new chapter of conservation. In the first chapter of conservation in this country, you had wilderness and then you had city. But today, more and more, we understand that there's this very important piece in the middle that we call the working landscape.
That is Leslie Allison, the Executive Director of the Western Landowners Alliance.
These are the places that provide our food, our fiber. They provide the jobs that sustain the rural communities. These things are incredibly important and they're disappearing. And that's really our next challenge going forward. We have to think beyond protected wilderness. And you can't do that unless you're engaging the people in those landscapes, first and foremost in that solution.
Led by the people on the ground, Western Landowners Alliance advances policies and practices that sustain working lands, connected landscapes, and native species.
What we're seeing in the West today is incredibly hopeful because you do see collaborations, working with partners, trying to realize this vision that's so important to us. I think many places in the rural West are actually leading the way on this.
And so can you. Join us and learn more at westernlandowners.org.
This year's Regenerate Conference is coming up quickly. It'll be held in Santa Fe, New Mexico, November 1st through 3rd, and it's an exploration of regenerative agriculture at every scale, from microbial soil communities to social relationships and markets to changing climate and everything in between. Come and learn how people from all walks of life are innovating on the land, in the markets, and with their communities to bring greater diversity and resilience to this movement. There are many free educational and social offerings that are open to the public on the pre-conference day, November 1st. Check out the website for more information, regenerateconference.com. And now back to our program. Are these nonprofits the ones who are identifying who needs the grants? In other words, who should be applying? I mean, what does that look like? Because, exactly because it is not the big four, it's not consolidated, it's distributed all across the landscape, all across the country. How are you kind of wrangling that?
So we are very fortunate that we've got a great team. My fellow director, Chris Roper, has a ton of experience in building meat processing plants and running them through the years. But then the Flower Hill team, the group that we have behind us, have put together a great structure for us to be able to respond. And so what we do is we ask people, and they can go on to flowerhill.institute, and there's a tab that says USDA MPPTA, and you go on that and you file a request for technical assistance. It's just a simple form. They can tell us who they are, where they are, what are they wanting to do, what are they doing right now, what kind of help do they need. And when that comes in, we get back to them within 24 hours. A lot of times it'll be just a quick email saying, we need a little more information. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're needing? It might be that we're just sending them some of the resources that they're looking for that we have access to through the internet. But most of the time what we will do is say, okay, let's connect this person with this technical assistance provider because they have the expertise. We'll get on a Zoom with them and kind of talk through and put that together. I'm really proud of just within the last couple weeks, we've officially gone over 900 requests for technical assistance, all the way from Puerto Rico to the Northern Mariana Islands. And so it is a bit of a challenge. I mean, today, I started off my day working with one of the partner organizations we're working with to try and put together sort of a template that processors can use in developing their business plan. Right after that, I got a call from one of the folks we're working with in Puerto Rico, where right now they're a co-op of producers that produce hogs for the restaurants along what they call the Pork Highway in Puerto Rico. Throughout the day, it's all of these different folks, but all of them share a commitment that they want to get good quality meat and poultry into the marketplace for their communities and for their customers.
Tell us that story about the Pork Highway, which, by the way, I want to visit. It's one of those examples of which you can find countless numbers across the country, perhaps across the world, where basically local producers producing food are at a disadvantage to the same food being shipped in from a long distance.
Yeah, we're seeing that right now. Puerto Rico's a real good example. This cooperative that we're working with, like I say, right now they're producing whole hogs. They're not small suckling pigs. These are full-grown hogs that are roasted. You go into a restaurant along the Pork Highway and there it is in the window on a spit, and they cut off some and it's delicious. But this group of producers now are trying to acquire a processing facility and expand their operation so that they can provide fresh pork in the grocery stores in Puerto Rico for Puerto Rican people, because Puerto Rico only produces about 12% of the meat that they consume. The rest of it is imported. The challenge that this group is facing is that in order to keep pork prices reasonable for consumers in Puerto Rico, we, being the mainland U.S., have subsidized the export of pork from the big processors to Puerto Rico to go into the grocery stores. So now you have these local Puerto Rican pork producers that if they're going to go into their grocery chain in San Juan and elsewhere throughout the island, they're having to compete against this subsidized pork coming in from the mainland. So we are starting to say, gosh, maybe if we just took a small portion of those subsidies for that pork coming from the mainland and use that to incentivize those local pork producers, we could start to change that paradigm. And we see what's happening in Puerto Rico is very similar to particularly what's happened with tribal nations all across the country. You know, you have producers that produce really good quality animals, but they've been weaning them. If they're cattle producers, they're weaning the calves and they go off through a sale barn and they end up someplace to be finished and processed. And at the same time, when we have food go into those tribal nations, to the reservations through a program that's called the Food Distribution on Indian Reservations, it's commodity beef that's being shipped in to feed those people. And so the tribal producers are really saying, wait a second, what's wrong with this system? Why can't we develop the infrastructure so that we can process the animals that we're raising and have them here to feed our own people? And we've seen that happen. We're up to about 20 different tribally owned or tribally rancher owned processing plants around the country right now, and that number is growing because they recognize that infrastructure is going to help them keep that food in their community. It's also going to help the profitability and the stability of those ranchers that are raising the animals.
I think this is a really important thing to talk about because it seems like there's a lot of advantages to doing that, not for the big consolidated meat producers, but basically for everyone else, including carbon footprint. I mean, if you were to have an initiative that resulted in food being kept in, I mean, obviously it's not all going to be, your local farmer's market, but within a kind of reasonable regional distance, it seems like that would lower the carbon footprint, and perhaps would it lower the cost of food?
Well, it would lower the carbon footprint, definitely, because right now, I mean, we're working with a group in northwest New Mexico in the Farmington area, and they say, gosh, what sense does this make? We wean our calves here, we send them to a finishing yard in Garden City, Kansas, where they get finished and fattened up, and then get shipped to Greeley, Colorado to be processed and put into a package to be shipped back to our grocery store in Farmington, New Mexico. So there's got to be a better way to do that. One of the things that we're looking at right now, and this is a concept it's been around for a long time, but there's a document that the Native American Agriculture Fund developed about 4 years ago that really helps illustrate this, and they call it Reimagining Tribal or Native Food Systems. And one of the things that they look at there is the idea of food hubs. So maybe we could have a national brand, a naturally native beef, that would be tribally raised or whatever, that would be a national brand. And shoppers, if they go into the grocery store, it would have some uniform quality, it'd have uniform packaging, etc. However, if they're in a grocery store in Billings, Montana, it might be coming from a plant on the Blackfeet Nation. If they're in a grocery store in Oklahoma City, it might be coming from the Osage Nation, just up the road from there. And so the ability for producers to aggregate and do some of that is going to be critical for us then to try and address some of the costs, because The reason that even if we're not transporting that animal from Farmington to Garden City to Greeley back to Farmington is that, the big meat processors, they can break down an animal very quickly, very efficiently, because they have low-paid help sitting there doing assembly line work. It's not skilled work inside those plants. You're a low-paid worker. You're standing there all day long doing one repetitive motion as things whiz by you. And what we're looking at with these smaller plants is that we need skilled butchers. We need to bring back the skill of butchery. We need people that they can be on the harvest floor one day, but they might be in the packaging room the next day. They might be out on the retail counter the third day. They need to have those skill sets, and we want to pay them a decent wage. In fact, that's one of the things I'm really pleased that when USDA, there's just a new grant opportunity that came out a couple of weeks ago. And one of the scoring criteria in those grant applications is, does your business plan call for you to pay good wages to your workers? That's important. It's not just about the ranchers. It's not just about the animals. It's about everybody that handles that product all the way from the ranch to the customer. And so there's going to be some higher cost in doing some of that, but it also creates stronger communities, stronger families. The benefits are pretty significant.
What are the environmental benefits?
Well, the environmental benefits, again, is that when you think about these animals that are out on the grasslands and being managed regeneratively, is that you're helping to build soil. You're creating a good, healthy mass out there that traps the rain and holds it. It has the microbiome down in there. And, one of the things I'm fascinated by is there's some research right now, again, my background being in the bison business, but if you take a look at the microbiome in a healthy soil and a microbiome in the gut of a healthy bison, they're very similar. They're very similar. And there's been, some research up in Canada that talks about, the bison have got all the snot around their nose and everything. And when they get that nose down there at the ground, there's this transfer of the microbes from the soil to the animal, and the animal will lick that snot and take it down into its gut. And those microbes are down in the gut of the animal. So you think about that symbiotic relationship between a healthy animal and a healthy landscape. It's really significant.
There's always somebody who will ask the question in a conversation like this, well, if it raises the price of meat in the store, I'm not interested. And I think the problem we have, because we're at such a point of deep inequality in our country, so many people are barely making it, barely getting by, and then so many other people have way more than they need, but the people at the bottom, they still have to balance their budget, their food budget.
Absolutely. And, one of the things I look at is that, the average person eats about 55 pounds of beef a year. And some people will say, we eat too much. Well, maybe we do. I'm always one that says maybe I'd eat a little bit less if I could eat a higher quality and have that. I think we always have to make a commitment to making sure that everyone has access to good quality food. I don't think that the rancher should be the one that has to pay the bill to keep food cheap. And right now, that's what's happening right now, is it's all coming back to that farmer and rancher out there because they're not getting a reasonable price for their products. I think that we can do some things, need to continue to do some things through the Farm Bill, which is getting rewritten as we speak right now, but through our food policy to help make sure that, through the SNAP program, through WIC, through school lunch programs, through the others, that we make sure that people do have access to good, healthy food. But we shouldn't expect the rancher and the farmer to always have to produce the cheapest product so that we can make it happen.
Well, and that's the problem with this situation that we have now of consolidation and sort of monopoly style mega companies. Even if it's not a monopoly of one, it's a monopoly of a few. And in any given region, it might be one. I mean, they're going to be the elephant, so to speak, in the room no matter what, because whatever you do, whatever we in the regenerative community are trying to do, they're going to work very hard against local and regional food systems and use all their money and power and energy to do so. What do you do about that?
Well, there are some things that we will never be able to compete against the big four on. And one of the things that I tell every single client that we work with is that if you're proposing to put together a processing project that's going to result in a 1 pound brick of ground beef that's going to go sit in Kroger or Walmart next to JBS's 1 pound brick of ground beef, we're going to lose that battle every time because they'll be able to underprice us. But if we can call out the difference in our product, is it organic? Is it grass-fed? Is it regenerative? Is it tribally produced? What are those attributes that we can use to distinguish our product from the commodity products out there? We can do that in a way that they can't. JBS isn't going to slow down their 4,000 head a day line to run 100 head of organic animals through the system. So, we have to emphasize what are the things that we can do better than they can do.
When you look at the whole big system of farming, of ranching, of agriculture, farmers are by and large not profitable. They are barely making it. A lot of people have off-farm income. There are subsidies, there's crop insurance, there's all kinds of things. The kind of work you're doing now and that the Biden administration is supporting, do you see that resulting in more actual prosperity and profitability for agrarians on the land?
That's definitely what we're working toward, and I can guarantee you Secretary Vilsack would love to be in on this conversation right now, because this year I had a chance to hear him speak in 3 different venues over about a course of less than a month. And each one, he started off by saying, net farm income last year in the U.S. hit a record high. He said that's where an agriculture secretary would usually pat themselves on the back and sit down. But he said if you start to peel away the number, half of the farmers and ranchers last year lost money. Another 40% made money, but only because of their off-farm employment. He said that means that this record farm income, there are only 10% of the farmers out there that are really getting the benefits of that. And that's where he said we've got to rethink our policies from top to bottom. And that's where what we're doing with the meat and poultry processing and working with the livestock producers and the growers is an important piece, but it's a piece of a larger puzzle that I think USDA right now is committed to trying to address.
What I always go back to is this thing of ranchers are losing money and they're working really hard. Shareholders in big food companies are making money and they're not doing anything at all except for buying shares. And that is the system that we live in. That is the capitalist system.
It is. And it's very frustrating. One of the things years ago, the European Union had this concept that they were putting into some of their policies that they called the multifunctional aspect of agriculture. And you think about it, we have folks out there that are raising livestock, they're raising their cattle, whatever, and they're providing open space, they're providing wildlife habitat, they're creating an ecosystem that captures water and stores it. They're creating this recreation, areas for people to go hunting and fishing. And yet all they're getting paid for is a pound of beef, or, what's the pound of that animal when they take it to market. And so we need to really recognize that these folks that are producing the food for our country are producing so much more. And, I live in the Front Range of Colorado, which is rapidly urbanizing. And it's those ranchers and farmers out there that are farming in between the subdivisions that are still providing that open space and those views of the mountains that everybody really appreciates. They need to be compensated for those other values that they're providing.
Do you see that happening through carbon markets and ecosystem services?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the other things that USDA has done that's been very bold is the whole suite of carbon smart agriculture grants that they put out last year and in the beginning of this year. And when you take a look at those grants, they're all focused on how do we get money back to the producers, the ranchers, the farmers, for providing carbon smart commodities. And I happen to be involved in helping to write one of the grants. Before I took on this job, I was the director of the National Bison Association, and we were working with South Dakota State University on a grant that they received, a multi-million-dollar grant that they received that is really focused on large grazers, on bison, on cattle, and putting together the market structures so that they can be compensated for the climate smart practices that they're undertaking.
Do you envision sort of in the long run a time where grants and subsidies are no longer a dominant player in the economics of agriculture?
Yes. And, part of what we're working on right now is, we're up to our eyebrows in helping people access grants. Again, there's a new one that's out. Anybody that's interested in developing or expanding their meat processing thing needs to, floweryhill.institute, apply for technical assistance, and we'll help you out. But as we look at them, accessing those grants, what is in your business plan to make you self-sustainable? How do you continue to operate this? The grants can be used as a boost. They can be used as a shoehorn to get you started. But over the long haul, how can we make sure that you're sustainable both economically and environmentally?
Dave Carter, you know so much about all of this, and I'd love it if you could just tell listeners a little bit about your own background, your own history in this whole world of agriculture, ranching, meat processing, and so on.
Well, I've been very fortunate in everything I did. I didn't grow up on a farm or ranch. I grew up in an incredibly rural, isolated area. It's a little place up in the mountains of Colorado right next to Rocky Mountain National Park. So I grew up in the tourist business. The only livestock I ever did was I worked in a riding stable. But yeah, so, got my degree in journalism and wanted to buy a weekly newspaper, but didn't have the money to do it. My wife and I were both in journalism. We didn't have the money. So I found out this organization, Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, was looking for a PR person. So I thought I'd do that for a short time to save up some money and came into it, fell in love with agriculture, fell in love with farmers and ranchers, came into it just as we were entering into what's still known as the farm crisis in the 1980s, a really ugly time, in which there was a deliberate attempt to try and balance the federal budget by foreclosing on farmers who were delinquent in some of their loans and the like. And so, it was up to my earlobes in the 80s working with that. And it's really out of the farm crisis where then some folks started to emerge that wanted to look at agriculture differently. They said, you either have a choice, you're going to be a large-scale commodity producer, which means you're going to operate on margins that are razor thin, so that means you got to produce more bushels or more pounds at the cheapest price. You got to use this new genetic engineering. You got to have the biggest tractor. You got to have the most chemicals. And then there were other folks, like Mel Coleman here in Colorado, or the folks at Organic Valley in Wisconsin that were saying, no, we're not commodity producers, we're food producers. And so they started to pioneer organic and sustainable. And that's really where my passion began to gravitate. So then in 2001, I decided it was never too late to have a midlife crisis. So I decided to leave the Farmers Union organization. I'd been president of the regional branch for about 8 years. And I was just going to go off and do consulting work. Well, two things happened. Number one is I ended up on the National Organic Standards Board for USDA, so was helping to put together the organic standards. But the second thing was that the National Bison Association needed an executive director. And so I backed into that and fell in love with bison. A year after I started as executive director, my wife and I bought our first 5 heifer calves and started building our own herd of bison. That wasn't a full-time job, so I've done a lot of consulting. That's where I got involved in the pet food business or importing organic cheese from England and various sundry other things. So that's where, it kind of all came together that when USDA decided to put together this technical assistance program, some of the people I knew at USDA reached out and said, Dave, just because of your background and the variety that you have, as well as to Chris Roper, my fellow director, he said, would you guys be willing to come on and help us coordinate this program? Because we need to have some, people with different experience and expertise. And it's just been a great ride here for the last 18 months to be a part of this mission to create a more resilient, equitable, and diverse meat processing system.
Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you want to let people know?
No, I think we've covered it pretty well. I really appreciate this. It's been a fun conversation.
You can find more about Dave Carter's work at flowerhill.institute. Dave Carter, thank you so much for being with us on Down to Earth.
Oh, I really appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation. So be glad to do it anytime.
Excellent. And Dave Carter will be speaking at the Regenerate Conference, which is this November 1st through 3rd. You can find out more at regenerateconference.com. And one more thing before we go. Quivira Coalition's new agrarian program opens applications for 2024 apprentices from November 1st through December 15th. This 8-month full-time apprenticeship program helps beginning agrarians gain mentorship and work experience in regenerative ranching and farming at mentor operations in New Mexico, Colorado, and Montana. For more information, visit our website at quiviracoalition.org/newagrarian and visit Quivira's events tab to register for the next NAP 101 call, where we describe our participating mentor sites in detail and answer questions from prospective apprentices. Hope to see you there. Quivira is spelled Quivira. Once again, quiviracoalition.org/newagrarian. You've been listening to Down to Earth. We would love it if you would support this program, which you can do by going to patreon.com/down-to-earth planet to plate, where you can sign up for as little as $3. Patreon is Patreon. And also please rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. The Quivira Coalition is a not-for-profit and a community network of ranchers, farmers, conservationists, scientists, educators, and many others dedicated to regenerative practices that produce healthy food, support meaningful livelihoods, sustain biodiversity, and remedy the impacts of climate change. To learn more about Quivira and how you can support their work, visit quiviracoalition.org, Quivira. And finally, this show is a production with the Radio Cafe. You can check out radiocafe.org to hear back episodes of this show and also find all kinds of other shows on a wide variety of topics as well. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.